Hey there, my friends. Derek here from B.O.M Socks. Welcome to another week of B.O.M-BITES, where we feast upon the words of Christ one bite at a time. So this week we're doing sections 46, 47, and 48, and there's some cool stuff in here. So I want to give you a little bit of context about what's going on during this time period to help you understand why these sections are so important. So go right to the Come Follow Me manual where it gives you a little introduction. And it says, as Parley P. Pratt, Oliver Cowdery, Ziba Peterson, and Peter Whitmer Jr., which you remember those four missionaries who were called to go baptize Lamanites, and that mission didn't baptize very many Lamanites. In fact, there was none. But they found all of the members in Sidney Rigdon's congregation in Kirtland, Ohio, over 100 individuals. So as they moved on to other fields of labor, particularly to find those Lamanites, they left over 100 converts who had plenty of zeal, but little experience or direction. We'll talk about that in a minute. There were no instructional handbooks, no leadership training meetings, no broadcasts of General Conference. In fact, there weren't even many copies of the Book of Mormon to go around. Many of these new believers had been drawn to the restored gospel by the promise of marvelous manifestations of the Spirit, especially those they knew about from studying the New Testament. I know Sidney's congregation was very much trying to return to a New Testament gospel. 1 Corinthians 12, 1 through 11 talks about spiritual gifts. Soon, some unusual expressions of worship, including falling to the ground, writhing like a snake. We'll talk about a couple other of those in a minute. They were introduced into their church meetings. Many found it hard to discern which manifestations were of the Spirit and which were not. Now, let me pause right there. We do that same thing today, right? So you see some individuals who are a little bit more emotional than others. In fact, I remember having a missionary companion, good guy, absolutely good guy, but just in the newness of being a brand new missionary, we were sitting in a zone conference, and there was a lot of tears flowing. It was a good meeting. There was some good spirit there, and I looked over at this companion of mine, and he was sitting there pressing his eyes just really hard, just like a little bit uncomfortably hard. And I looked at him and I was like, what are you doing? And he just said, I want to feel the Spirit. And I said, how do you feel right now? And he goes, well, I feel good. I feel excited. I'm not crying, and everybody's crying, and I want to cry too. And I'll tell you what, that's a real thing out there. Sometimes our emotional side and spiritual side are so connected that it's possible to confuse the two. I think we do people a great injustice when we stand up in a sacrament meeting or whatever and just say, brothers and sisters, as we can see, the Spirit has been felt here, and there's not a dry eye in the audience. Yeah, don't do that, because then you got those who aren't emotional who are starting to feel like they are broken. In fact, let me show you this guy right here. So this man's name is Levi Hancock, okay? So it talks quite a bit about Levi Hancock in an article called Religious Enthusiasm Among Early Ohio Converts. In fact, it's right here. You can click on it right there in your Come Follow Me manual, but it gives you a little bit of an idea about the context of this. So here's Brother Levi again. So Levi was 27 years old in 1830. He lived in New Lime, Ohio, about 30 miles east of Kirtland. During his childhood, his mother had instilled in him a deep interest in spiritual matters. So Hancock believed that God often intervened in daily life and spoke to men and women through dreams. So Levi was one of more than 100 baptized as a result of these four missionaries' visit. But the missionaries' stay was short-lived. They soon departed from Missouri, leaving the small band of converts, like I'd read before, near Kirtland without experienced leadership. And several prominent figures among the new converts left about the same time, including Sidney Rigdon, Edward Partridge. They went to go meet with Joseph. And so in the meantime, you got guys left without any kind of leadership. So there's a time period called the Second Great Awakening. And one of the characteristics of this revivalist culture was an increased interest in spiritual manifestations and gifts. The ardent preachers of the time, Charles Finney, Lorenzo Dow, George Lane, who may very well have been the one who had influenced Joseph Smith, because one of his big things was that James 1:5, if any of you lack wisdom, and others, they elicited passionate responses from their audiences, including prophesying, crying, shouting, dancing, shaking, and rolling around on the ground. Some groups, such as the United Society of Believers in the Second Coming of Jesus Christ, called the Shakers, which we'll learn about them next week, even made some of these practices a formal part of their worship. So in early January 1831, Levi Hancock met three young men named Edson Fuller, Heman Bassett, and Burr Riggs, great guys, who introduced themselves as elders of the Church of Christ. According to Hancock, these young elders engaged in all manner of doings during worship services. Burr Riggs would jump up up from the floor, strike his head against the joist, swing some minutes, and then fall like he was dead. He would then rise and relate visions he had while unconscious. Edson Fuller would fall and turn black in the face. Heman Bassett would behave like a baboon. These strange behaviors perplexed Hancock. After all, he himself had experienced feelings, impressions, and dreams that he believed were spiritual communications. The young men seemed so honest and sincere that I was led to believe all that they said. And this gets me. He even worried that perhaps I was not as pure as those young men. However, their actions were very different from the spiritual feelings he had experienced. Now, as they're reading the Book of Mormon as well, it says others introduced innovations peculiar to their groups. Some would fancy to themselves that they had the sword of Laban and would wield it as expert as a light dragoon. Some would slide or scoot on the floor with the rapidity of a serpent, which they termed sailing in the boat to the Lamanites. So you can kind of see what's going on right here. So there's a lot of confusion. Well, Joseph shows up, and it says he wrote to his brother Hiram, who's then in Colesville, New York, and he just said, I have been engaged in regulating the churches here as the disciples, and you see the misspellings, and that's okay. That's the way Joseph was. The disciples are as numerous, and the devil had made many attempts to overthrow them. So keeping in mind, if you were Satan, you'd really want to have a heyday with this time period. Well, let me go back to the introduction right here. Seeing the confusion, Joseph prayed for help. The Lord's answer is equally valuable today when people often reject or ignore the things of the Spirit. The Lord revealed that spiritual manifestations are real and clarified what they are. Gifts from a loving Heavenly Father, given for the benefit of those who love Him and keep all His commandments. So that's where you see the context of section 46, 47, and 48. So hopefully that helps you get some ideas and maybe think about as well the way you view spiritual gifts and the things that have been given and how we view others with those as well. And I think you'll be enlightened this week. So anyway, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and thanks for sharing. You guys are amazing. Godspeed. We'll see ya. Bye-bye.